What's up, guys? Shredlord here with another Axe Wielder Spotlight. I'm sorry that I suck ass and it's taken so long for me to do another one, but I promise from Tony Iommi to this video will not be as long for the next video. So, with the recent terrible news of Dave Mustaine of Megadeth recently finding out he has cancer, I decided to make this video about Dave. Dave and Megadeth have always had a very special place in my heart as a musician and as a music listener. I was always that kid that was diehard Megadeth in the face of many, many Metallica fans, and I made sure to be aggressively annoying to let them all know how much better I thought Megadeth was than Metallica. Yes, I was that prick bag, but I still believe it in my heart 100% to this day. As many of you know, Dave Mustaine has had a long history of being pretty much a riff god. If I have to think of like mainstream metal music and metal music in general, if you don't recognize him as one of the most iconic riff writers and songwriters in thrash metal, then you stupid, okay? But in all seriousness, he's a legend, he's an icon, whether you like his personality or not. Sometimes, you know, he says some off the wall shit, but whatever. We're not here to debate him as a person. I'm here to talk about him as a musician. So I want to bring to you my 5 favorite riffs, and then even though during the Megadeth days he definitely did leads a lot, he wasn't always the primary lead player, so sometimes you have to really dive into some Megadeth to hear some really cool Dave Mustaine solos. So without further ado, let's go ahead and get into the riffs. I was writing down my list and then I noticed one thing, that a lot of these riffs were opening riffs, and I thought to myself, well, that's simple. Once again, Dave Mustaine being the god, one of the gods of the riff, he has this innate ability to draw you in right from the get-go. You know, Dave Mustaine, in my opinion, writes some of the best opening riffs, period. So let's go ahead and talk about number 1. Now, the album United Abominations was always really cool to me because I had liked hearing Glenn Drover. Remember, I'm a guitar player, so I geek out about all things guitar. Glenn Drover playing with King Diamond in the past. So when I found out that Glenn Drover was going to be playing with Megadeth, I was like, okay, sweet, can't wait to hear this. And when I turned on the album and immediately heard Washington Is Next, I absolutely love the open string guitar riff that is the intro to that, while the other guitar player builds the tension underneath with the chords. To me, it sets up the entire album and the song for a lot of badassness that I think that album delivers. So for that reason, Washington Is Next is the first one. Second, Holy Wars. Come on, man. It's one of the most iconic riffs in metal. Holy Wars, for sure. Without even getting into much detail about that, you know, that whole album in itself, in my opinion, that's a perfect album. Perfect metal album. One of the most iconic metal albums of its time. And Holy Wars is one of the shiniest gems on an all-around kick-ass album. Toning it down a little bit, the album Cryptic Writings had a little bit more... It wasn't as thrashy as the other albums per se, but there were some really good songs on that album I enjoy listening to this day. Like in a long car ride, I'll put that on. It's kind of like a cruise around in the summer kind of album. I really love the track She-Wolf. Even though that opening riff is basically him just droning on a note. I'm getting excited just singing it to you. But I always thought that riff was a supercharger. Like, it would get me pumped up immediately. As soon as I hear that chugging, I'm like, oh shit. My body is surging with energy. Power level 9,000. So, for that alone, just because it takes my power level to 9,000, that's why it had to be on this list. That and the whole song's badass. Especially, I love the part at the end, even though it didn't make the list, because it's not really a solo per se, but the melody, the dual guitar melody at the end of this song is an amazing Megadeth moment, and I love hearing it. Next, we're going to take you back to the early inversions of Megadeth with Gar and Chris Poland. Devil's Island. Now, what's cool about Devil's Island is it's not the most complicated riff that Dave Mustaine ever put together, but the right notes, the right chords and the right time make it an epic beginning to a track, especially when the other guitar comes in with the tapping sequence, and it makes for an awesome introduction. It's an iconic moment for me when I think of Megadeth. Like, some of my earliest memories are listening to that album, and that's definitely a standout track, and I know Necrotic Nick would absolutely 1000% agree with me. He might be hard editing this video when I just mention Devil's Island. God, I hope not, actually, but I don't know. To each their own. Next, In My Darkest Hour. A lot can be said about this song. If you don't know the story of it, evidently, I believe Dave wrote this song about Cliff Burton, the late bassist for Metallica. It's a slow, heavy-moving, yet epic and powerful track. Once again, it doesn't have anything that's crazy fast-moving like some of the other riffs that we've talked about, but the way it was constructed and the power that it draws is the reason why it's made this list for me. And I know I said 5, but I'm a liar. I really meant 6. And of course, one of my all-time favorites, I remember learning this song as a wee lad, Tornado of Souls. Now, that riff is super cool. The entire song is super cool. Of course, it comes off that one of the best metal albums of all time. It is a mover, so it's a little bit different than the last couple ones we talked about. But the great thing about Dave Mustaine is that he always knew how to mix the right amount of riffs and chords together, and he makes great blends. That's what makes him so special. He's very appropriate. Tornado Souls is absolutely no exception. He combines many riffs and many good chord progressions to create a masterpiece, and for me, the intro to Tornado of Souls is one of my favorite, most catchiest metal riffs that I can think of personally. Now we're going to examine some of Dave's solos. So when I say 5 this time, I actually mean 5 this time. So with that being said, once again, Dave wasn't always the main lead player, but Dave did have a lot of gems. Dave is more, from a lead player standpoint, he is more of a pentatonic kind of guy. He uses a lot of pentatonic stuff, as a lot of guitar players do. So he sticks with the pentatonic a lot, and if he moves positions or creates interesting runs, it's usually chromatic stuff that he'll take a pattern and just keep moving it on up until he hits that next chromatic pattern, and then continue on with that pentatonic stuff. He does it right, and he does it well. You know, it never sounds out of place. That's the other thing, too, is sometimes you'll listen to bands with 2 guitar players. You'll hear one guitar player, you know, that guy's had some killer guitarists, I mean, without saying. Chris Poland, Marty Friedman, Chris Broderick, Jeff Waters very briefly, Kiko now, just all sorts of great guitar players. But sometimes you'll listen to a band with 2 guitar players, and one's lead style will be like, oh man, that guy's shredding balls, that's awesome. And then the other guy, it's okay, but you know, there's a little flub here, a little flub there. Dave, even though he was never as technically efficient as everyone else he had in Megadeth as the lead guitarist, he was still good enough to create badass thrash type solos. So he had more of a traditional thrash solo sound. So when you combine that with the more virtuosic approach of the other guys that he brought into the band, that made for a cool blend as well. So the first thing I'll talk about is one of my favorites, is his solo at the end of Holy Wars. Nice and intense, has some really cool moments, some really cool speed picking stuff, and just a perfect way to end the track, especially after all the Marty Friedman delicious madness that was sprinkled all over before. Next, another awesome track, Hangar 18. At the end of Hangar 18, Marty and Dave go back and forth, trading off, and the play between the 2 guitars is absolutely incredible. And while I can definitely make note of Marty's incredible leads always, we're not here to talk about Marty. Not yet. So, Dave Mustaine's leads, once again, they paired very nicely with Marty. Marty can be a tough act to follow, so he was trying to, you know, even though Dave was doing his thing, hung in right there with them and delivered some awesome leads back and forth for the end of Holy Wars. The next 2 solos come off an album which I think is incredibly important in the Megadeth discography. The System Has Failed. So a little bit of background on that album. Dave Mustaine had fallen asleep, something like that, fallen asleep on his arm, and I believe it had gone for so long that he lost a lot of feeling and nerves, and there was speculation if Dave Mustaine would ever play again. Well, Dave doesn't listen to anybody, and he said, fuck this, I'm gonna play again. So he went through a lot of rehabbing and stuff. And then a really exciting thing for Megadeth fans is that he brought Chris Poland back into the fold and came out with The System Has Failed. Now, if you think about it, if a guy had an arm injury, especially to his right hand, and if you're a riffer, your right hand is, that's where it's at, man. So you almost didn't know what to expect with this album from a songwriting riff standpoint, let alone a lead standpoint. But Dave was actually really solid sounding. If anything, I think he made sure that he came back stronger and better than before to prove everybody wrong. That's the great thing about Dave. He's super resilient, and when he gets pissed off and sets his mind to something, he fucking does it. So, Kick the Chair has some incredible lead work by Dave Mustaine. Really raunchy, really good. So does Blackmail the Universe. Blackmail the Universe is a sick-ass Dave Mustaine solo. So if you've never heard either of them, I'm not sure how familiar everyone is with the entire body of work of Megadeth, but if you haven't heard those two tracks, you definitely need to, and be on the lookout for Dave's leads on those because they are killer. And finally, the very last solo that I'll talk about is another one off of Rust in Peace, but it's Five Magics. So for me, Five Magics is an incredible solo, no matter who's playing it. But here's why it was so cool to me. It's that album is sprinkled with so many memorable, legendary Marty Friedman licks and solos that, for me as a guitar player, my mind always goes to the Marty stuff, except for this. Like, it's a classic Dave Mustaine solo, doing what Dave does best, but the context and the rhythm of which he's doing it really gives it a powerful standpoint and showcases a lot of Dave's ability as a lead player. So I think he just kind of went for it and said, fuck it, I'm going to tear this one up, and he absolutely did. So once again, if you haven't heard of any of these solos, or for God's sake, if you haven't heard of any of these songs, you should absolutely do yourself a favor and go check them out, as they are truly epic. Now, the only other thing is I will tell you, I love reading people's lists myself. I'm kind of a list whore. So I'm sure everybody's going to have a little bit of a different list than what I said. So if you have a difference of opinion, please let it be known in the comment section below. Let us know what you think. If my list sucked, if you think I should have put something in better, or just something different, please let us know. As always, like and subscribe. Thank you for tuning in, and we will catch you on the flip.